As far as Zelda games go, you'd be hard pressed to find one more divisive than The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. It has some pretty undeniable flaws, but one thing that everyone seems to commend it for is its dungeon design. The game is home to some of the most creative temples in the entire series, and to me, nothing exemplifies this more than its 5th dungeon, the Sandship. Before we get into how masterfully crafted the dungeon itself is though, we have to take a moment to appreciate the context behind it. You see, the Sandship isn't just some random building you can rock up to and walk inside like you would with any other temple, even finding it is an ordeal in itself. As you trek through the harsh sands of the Lanayru desert, you'll eventually come across an area known as the Sand Sea, which, as you may have guessed, is a sea made entirely out of sand. There, you find a small boat and the broken remains of a robot, and on this boat is a timeshift stone. For those unaware, this is one of Skyward Sword's mechanics and works as a time travel system. Hitting a timeshift stone causes your surroundings to be transported 1000 years into the past, and in this case, doing so causes the boat to be restored to its original form and the robot to be brought back to life. The robot, Skipper, tells you that he used to be the captain of an old ship until it was taken over by pirates and his whole crew was thrown overboard. The ship he's referring to here is none other than the Sandship, but there is one small problem. It's completely invisible. As the Sandship's main purpose was to protect Nayru's flame, it was granted the ability to cloak itself to protect from attackers. Considering that you need the flame to help reunite with Zelda, and Skipper needs his ship back so he can reunite with his crew, you join forces with him in a bid to track down where it could be. So, you jump onto his little boat and sail around the Sand Sea, and man, this segment reminds me so much of Wind Waker, and I like that a lot. You've even got the cannon and everything. Your first destination is Skipper's Retreat, the captain's old home. There, you find the ancient sea chart, which guides you to the construction bay. You end up going through some wild minecart sections, which lead you into an old building filled with sand, and as you start clearing it, boom, you get caught lacking by a giant scorpion. Wait, hold on, doesn't this guy seem a little familiar to you guys? Oh yeah, it's the boss from the Lanayru mining facility. I don't know why, but I always found the fact that this guy got demoted from a boss to a mini-boss hilarious. The poor dude. After the fight, you find absolutely nothing in the bay, so you set your sights on the pirate stronghold. This is like a mini dungeon in itself, and uses a portable timeshift orb for some pretty clever puzzles. Placing said orb on its pedestal causes the mouth of the hideout to open, revealing the remains of the Sandship. Fi is able to use the wreckage as a means of dowsing for the dungeon, and this leads you to an unexplored portion of the map, where the dowser starts going crazy. If you start shooting your cannonballs into the air, you'll find that they're hitting against something. Keep firing away, and eventually the Sandship's location is revealed to you. In my opinion, all this context and backstory they provide is super neat. A lot of the time, temples in Zelda games are kinda just there, but here they went to the effort of really fleshing the Sandship out and making even finding it feel like its own journey. When you actually set foot on the ship, you'll find that it's in a state of disrepair. The whole thing is filled with sand, overrun with bats, scorpions, and other such enemies. It nails that abandoned atmosphere that you'd expect from a ship whose crew had long since perished with the sands of time. There are very few ways for you to actually go, as a lot of the doors and ladders are blocked off by old iron barbs. As each potential door, entrance, or option proves fruitless, the dungeon essentially funnels you down a linear path leading to one room. A room full of sand to be blown away with the gust bellows. Beneath the sand are some markings on the floor which give you clues as to how to open a door. Behind said door is a key, and with you only having passed by one locked door this far, one thing remains to do. But when you unlock the door, what you find isn't another room or anything inside the ship whatsoever. Rather, what you find yourself stepping onto is the gangplank, where you're faced with what is arguably the coolest mini-boss of all time. Staring proudly off into the distance is none other than Scervo, the robot pirate captain responsible for taking over the ship and locking up Skipper's crew. Robot and pirate captain. When you combine those two things, you really cannot go wrong, but what makes this guy even more of a beast is that somehow he's been alive and operational, piloting the ship for over 1000 years. Like, my man is on the grind, even Fi compliments him on his resilience. The actual fight against him is very unique as well. I mean, it's not often that you have a battle in an arena as narrow and claustrophobic as this. The goal is to knock Scervo off the end of the plank, whilst trying not to let yourself get backed into the spikes behind you. With each phase, the spikes slowly close in on you, meaning that you have even less room for error. It's such an exhilarating showdown that never lets up on its intensity, and the fact that you're fighting a pirate captain on the gangplank makes the fight a perfect fit for a ship-themed dungeon. Even the devs knew they had something special with this one when they brought it back with Dreadfuse in the Skykeep. Eventually, after Scervo falls to his demise, a treasure chest spawns in, and inside is the bow and arrows, and this is the point where the dungeon really opens up to you. Scattered throughout the ship are a bunch of switches which you weren't able to hit before, but now can thanks to the precision of the arrows. Most notably, there's a switch you can hit on the central mast, which causes a timeshift stone to rise up. Hit it, and the entire ship is restored to its former glory, but of course, along with it comes all the enemies that once took over it. To stop you from getting any further, the bokoblins block off all entrances, trapping you on the deck. This gives you a great opportunity to practice actually using your bow in a combat setting as you slowly pick them off one by one and take back control of the ship. Now, you can go inside of the ship while it's in working order, and here's where things get interesting. As the pirate captain has been dealt with, your next aim is to rescue Skipper's crew. However, when you find them, you'll see that they're trapped in by these electric bars. One of the robots tips you off that you can get into their cell via the engine room, but to do so, you'll need to activate the ship's 2 generators. The goal then becomes to figure out where these generators are, and to me, this is the most ingenious part of the dungeon. As you walk through the corridors of the ship, you'll find a locked door that you can only open by hitting a switch. The problem is that the only way to hit said switch is by shooting an arrow through an air vent, but of course you can't do that while the fan is spinning. In one of the rooms, you might notice that there's a light shining in from above. Look up and you'll see a hatch in the ceiling giving you a good view of the outside of the ship. The outside of the ship, including its central mast and the timeshift stone on top of it. I'm sure you can see where this is going, right? When you go back to the present, the fan of course no longer works, allowing you to hit the switch and enter the previously blocked off room. There are quite a few instances of interplay between the past and the present in this dungeon, and it's so seamlessly integrated. You do retread some of the same ground, but because you're constantly switching the time period and thus the state of the ship around you, it never feels stale. Like at one point you go into a room, exit out via a side window onto a lifeboat, climb back up to the deck, shoot the timeshift stone to go back to the present, re-enter the ship, walk through a passage that was blocked off by electricity, and then shoot the timeshift stone again from inside the ship so you can activate the generator in the past. The time travel mechanic is used a fair amount in Skyward Sword, but this dungeon is by far its best integration. Once both generators are activated, you can work your way through the engine room and also find a secret hoard full of treasure along the way. Finally, after all that effort, you can set Skipper's crew free, but your work isn't done yet. You still need to find Nayru's flame after all. Luckily, the robot from earlier gives you a key to the captain's cabin, where, after dealing with all the BMOS and those annoying technoblins, you get the boss key. But that begs the question, if you've already dealt with the pirate captain, then who could the boss of this dungeon possibly be? What lies behind that massive door? Well, this is yet another thing that makes the Sandship so great. There's this sense of intrigue and foreboding as you enter the control room, where you're greeted with a terrifying sight. Out of nowhere, a bunch of giant tentacles burst through the floorboard, shaking both the boat and Link to their respective cores. The whole ship lurches and rocks from side to side, and at this point, you can't possibly hope to win this battle, you just need to try and survive, to quite literally escape this sinking ship. As you dash from room to room, the ship starts to take on more and more water, and at one point, barrels even start to rain down on you, Donkey Kong style. At this point, you have no choice but to confront whatever monstrosity is causing this destruction up on deck. The moment you step outside, you're greeted with a stormy grey sky with rain pouring down on you. The tentacles start to shoot out once again, and the tension is higher than ever. The mood that this sequence sets is so incredible. It is such a powerful build-up that gets your blood pumping, and then you see the actual boss itself. The design is a bit of a letdown in all honesty. I feel like there was so much potential for a Kraken-themed boss, but they kinda fumbled it here. This dude straight up looks like a purple Mike Wazowski. I couldn't help but feel a little underwhelmed by the fight itself too. You just kinda cut off the tentacles with your Skyward Strike, shoot the massive yellow eye with your bow, and rinse and repeat. After how fantastic the pirate mini-boss was, and even looking at the main boss of the previous dungeon, Koloktos, a contender for the best boss in the whole series, it's easy to see why a lot of people were disappointed by Tentalus. Still, that's not to say that this ruins the Sandship by any stretch, far from it. It's just a mediocre ending to an otherwise stellar dungeon. The idea of a Zelda temple taking place on a ship of all things is such an out there concept, and yet they got it to work so well. Between the backstory, the process of finding it, the time travel mechanics, the Scervo fight, and the build up to the final boss, there is so much to love here, and to me, all of that combined makes the Sandship my favourite dungeon in Zelda history.